A space romance, a multiverse, multiple uprisings, hauntings, and sci-fi. A lot of sci-fi. That's right, today we are talking about my favorite books of all time. And let me preface with, these are my favorite books of all time right now, but I reserve the right to change this list at any time. But that's part of the reason that I wanted to film this now, because I have read some books recently that I feel like could creep its way onto the list in the future. But for me to dub something a favorite, I have to sit with it for a while to make sure that it is something that was really impactful for me. And so while all the books that have been sitting on my read shelf for years were eager to figure out if they were getting chosen for this list, there is definitely some newer reads that weren't so happy about that news. Like, I think me and Sky Full of Elephants have beef now, but hopefully that doesn't last long. But before I go over my 11 favorite books of all time, I do want to give a rapid fire of books that almost made the list and that could possibly make the list in the future. We have Final Revival of Opal and Nev. Quick synopsis, I feel like this is the Black people version of Daisy Jones and the Six. And then we have I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. The title tells you exactly what it's about. And then we have Monstrilio, which is a literary horror about a woman losing her son, and essentially he comes back to life as this little monster. Then we have How High We Go in the Dark, a sci-fi, multi-POV, multi-short story collection about a plague that mostly impacts kids and how the world changes because of it. And then we have A Sky Full of Elephants, a sci-fi that follows a world where white people don't exist. And so now that we have given those books their flowers, let's move on to my top 11 books of all time. Ooh, I don't know, I'm so nervous to put this list on the internet and like make it official. Ugh. But the first book I'm going to talk about, which almost didn't make the list and why I have 11, but I feel like thrillers do have my heart, and this author specifically, and I just felt like I had to include it, and that is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And so I'm someone, you will hear me say it, I do not F with spirits, okay? Anything ghostly, I think they're real, okay? And so I like to mind my business so that they mind their business. So I usually don't mess with anything in that vein. However, I do love it in a good book. So in Home Before Dark, there is a family that like flees this house because there are some weird things going on. And the father ends up writing this like horror memoir about their time in the house before they fled. And so when he dies, his daughter comes back to the house to prep it for sale. And she's never really believed all of this like haunted house type of stuff. But while she's there, some things start happening. And she's like, hold up. My heart was pounding the entire time. And her father's novel is kind of interwoven into this story too. So she's kind of seeing the parallels between what he was writing and what she's experiencing in the house. And I will always remember my experience reading the last 50 pages of this book. When I tell you, audible gasp, heart racing, shock after surprise, after plot twist, after plot twist. And that is solely why this book is on this list. Like, I will never forget my experience reading that. And I even remember my roommate was there while I was reading the last 50 pages, and she was looking at me like, are you okay? What could you possibly be reading to be making those faces? So yes, Home Before Dark, a thriller that made this list and right now is one of my favorite books of all time. And then we have The Deep by River Solomon. This is a fairly short book, but it is like a historical sci-fi about a people who are descendants of slaves that were thrown overboard, and they end up becoming like these mermaids. And we follow the historian of this group, and the way their history is set up, the historian in this group really is like the backbone of their society. And just the way that this was written was so magical, so lyrical almost, while also exploring this idea of something that actually happened in history. And it just kind of makes your mind like wonder, like, could that have happened? Again, I'm pretty gullible, so I'm someone, I think mermaids exist, okay? There's a lot of stuff in the ocean that we don't know about, Okay, so like, why couldn't this have been a thing? But when you think about all the history and knowledge that was lost during like the slave trade, slaves that didn't make it over to America, it really is sad, but it also just gets your mind going, right? So this is one of those ideas that I just think is like one of a kind, and I absolutely loved the writing. So the fact that a romance is on this list is so shocking to me, but this one, Honey and Spice. Honey and Spice. I've never read a romance that felt so real, that felt so relatable, that actually had me kicking my feet in the air, giggling, blushing. I've never ever said, oh, I have a book boyfriend. But if I could pick one, it would be the main character in here. Okay, Malachi, he knows how to treat a woman. Okay, and I'll say this book isn't like overly steamy either. There's one scene, and that's the only scene that you need. I feel like this book was paced so well, and I love when romances feel tangible. They feel real. And part of that for me is outside factors that influence a relationship. And in this book, we get to meet side characters, friendships, and I feel like all of that played into the role of me really loving this book. And so we follow a girl who has this podcast where she's essentially talking about how men ain't shit. And she ends up falling for someone who is kind of crowned like one of the biggest players on her college campus, and just watching them kind of fall in love, like it actually felt deep. They actually felt like they connected on real things, not just like these surface level things. I feel like the third act conflict and then like the resolution. And then this author is from like the UK. So if you listen to the audiobook, you get a good like UK accent, English accent in there, and it slaps. There was just no way that I couldn't include this book on the list somewhere. And then we have a book that actually I read in childhood, and it's one of the few books that I've ever reread. And when I reread it, I was like, okay, I think it's solidified in my favorite books, and that is The Giver. And I know some people may or may not agree with this pick, but for me, I feel like this was one of those first like kind of like literary sci-fi books that I read and really just kind of like set the tone for some of my other reading. And even if you think about The Deep by River Solomon, it really talks about the importance of like historians in communities. That's exactly what The Giver is. And there is just something about the way that this story is told that just feels very atmospheric to me. The way that we not only get to explore our main character and what he's experiencing, but then getting to see him watch his peers and like his family figure out like what their callings are and understand the community a little better was just so intriguing to me. And so this is one of those classic books that is making it on the list. And in 7th place, when I read this book, I would not shut up about it. And I've had people read it based on my recommendation, and some of them didn't like it. And I took that personally. And that is The One by John Mars. There is something about like a multi-POV story that really gets me going, especially in a sci-fi setting. And so The One follows this like sci-fi world where your perfect romantic match can be told to you after you take a DNA test. So your DNA tells you who your perfect match is, but we follow multi-POVs of like what that could actually look like. You know, it's not gonna be all sunshine and rainbows for everybody. And for example, we follow a serial killer. He has a perfect match out there somewhere. Who is it? You know what I mean? Also, it's like, what do you think about if your perfect match is all the way on the other side of the world? This book, it was one of those books that for the first time in a really long time, I had that feeling. And if you're like, read all the time, sometimes there's just this feeling when you read a book that just makes you excited about reading and you're like, this is why I read. And I think it's because I am a true sci-fi lover. And so anytime there is a sci-fi trope or idea that I feel like if I could write, I would want to write, I couldn't have written it, but I'm glad that I got to read it in this lifetime. And you know, I think I would normally be apprehensive about putting a series on the list that I haven't really completely finished yet or hasn't even completely came out yet. But with this book, no matter where the series goes, I know that the books that I've read so far, I will never forget. And so number 6 on this list is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I know I was just talking about the one, how it gives you that feeling like, oh my gosh. This is one of the more recent books that I read that feel like it just took me back to childhood when I'd be sitting in bed reading super late at night and just like, oh my gosh, I love this book so much. And I had not had that type of feeling as an adult in a really long time until I had read Legendborn. Representation is so important. This was a book that I wish that I had had as a kid. And while I'm not a kid now, this is still so important to me. And I'm just glad that like I really have gotten this book in my lifetime. It is one that like I think I will always keep very close to my heart because I think I see myself in Brea a little bit. And so we follow Brea, who she is experiencing a lot of grief after losing her mother. And so she ends up in this like secret magical society. And the feeling I had when I had the realization of what that society actually meant, I'm not gonna tell you because if you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil anything, but I literally had to do one of the like you have to close the book for a second and be like, is this author a genius? Are they a genius? I had to sit there for a second and just be in awe. There is a love triangle in here, and I feel like I am rooting for the underdog in here. I'm always gonna root for the nice guy. Okay, I know some of y'all hate that because I know some of y'all love a good dragon evil daddy, okay? Which like I can get behind, but sometimes like I just want the nice golden retriever. And so in this love triangle, there's a battle. I really don't know who's gonna win out. I have my favorite, but who knows? And if you haven't read this book, you're missing out. Number 5, we have another sci-fi. And I read this series when it first came out, but it's currently having a resurgence, and I love that for this series, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And I was lucky enough to be living in New York at the time that this book was having its first kind of go around. So like most of my editions are signed. But in Red Rising, we follow Darrow, or Darrow, however you want to say it. And he is a red, which means that he does this mining on Mars, and he is part of the lowest class in this caste system. But he has the opportunity to infiltrate the golds, which is the very top class in this caste system, and he does that by having this transformation, and he ends up going to this school where the golds learn how to fight and essentially become the leaders of this entire society. And so this is all set in space, and so this is just like the space sci-fi that like everybody needs to read. And I have Red Rising, which is the first book in this series on this list, but this book represents the entire series, at least the first 3 books, because I've only read the first 4 out of the entire 6. But even though this is on the list, I would say that I think maybe the second book may be my favorite out of all of them, which is crazy to say because I feel like a lot of like trilogies and series, they always have like middle book syndrome where you're like, okay, you're just writing this to get from point A to point B. But in this series, everything's hit after hit after hit after hit. So there's a reason this is having a second resurgence. Okay, so there may have been a little bit of an angle change because my camera was running out of storage. So at number 4, this is a book that I don't think anybody is going to disagree with me on. And that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I truly think this is like the sci-fi of all sci-fis. And so we follow a man on a lonely space mission until he ends up finding an unlikely ally while he's out there in space. And it is up to him to essentially make sure that human and mankind continues to live on. Like, this is such an important mission. And I know that's a short synopsis for a very long book, but you have to go into it not knowing a lot because there's a little surprise in here that makes the entire story. But this is one of those books that is just so universally good. And I know this is kind of universally good because I used to run a book club at my corporate job, and this was one of the picks. When I tell you, I still have people to this day telling me how much they loved this book. There's even someone at the office, he read this with his son, and he was like, this is like a core memory for us reading this book together. So if you haven't read this, definitely read it, especially before the movie comes out next year. I'm so excited to see how they portray certain things, but Mr. Andy Weir, he knows how to write a sci-fi. He knows how to make something scientific while also still being engaging, which I feel like is so hard to do, but he does it so masterfully. And the next book, I'm not gonna spend too much time on because I just think it's a classic for any millennial, but this, when I say is like, oh, I just get so like, oh, the nostalgia. The fact that I've reread this series and it still holds up. I just get so excited when I think about this series. And it's The Hunger Games. Definitely was unique in its time, but I still think it's unique now, which is why it's still so popular, which is why Suzanne Collins is still continuing the series, continuing the POVs, because it is such a classic. And I feel like sometimes series, they don't need reboots, they don't need continuations, but I was screaming from the ether to get Haymage's story. And someone heard me, okay, because we got it, and I'm so excited to dive back into that world soon. Just know, me and Hunger Games, we go together real bad. Okay, and number 2 on this list, when I tell you I've pimped this book out coast to coast. Anytime someone asks me for a book recommendation, no matter what type of genre they're into, they're just like, I just need something that's quick, that will have me turning the pages, that will get me back into reading. I recommend Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This book fucked me up mentally in the best way possible. In this story, we have a man who is essentially going through a multiverse, and he's experienced himself in different situations. And that's really all I'm gonna tell you, because you just have to go into the book knowing that you're going in for a wild, wild ride. I am someone who loves time travel, and I'm someone who really enjoys like reading about the thought of a multiverse, and the way that this was done, like it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And so when I think about the genre of this book, I always say like a thriller sci-fi. And I just love books where you will audibly be like, what just happened? And I feel like there's multiple times in this book that happens. And anytime I recommend this to people, they will give me like live reactions as they're reading it. And that's like always one of the first texts is like, what the hell? And listen, this book will leave you a little scrambled up here, but I think this book will never not be on my list, okay? I think this book has solidified itself as just always being one of my favorites, and I'm not mad about it. All right, guys, we are at number 1 on this list. Based on the picks that I've just had, I want you to leave in the comments before you see my number 1 what you think it is. Just let me know. I haven't mentioned this book on my channel in a while, so you either have to be an OG or just really good at guessing. I'll give you a second. All right, you got some time? All right. The number 1 book on the list, my favorite book of all time, Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. She is that girl when it comes to sci-fi, and I will not hear any other opinions on it, period. I remember when I read this book, I was in complete awe. This was like my intro into history being woven into other genres, especially sci-fi. And so we follow a young woman who is randomly transported back in time to the antebellum South, and she is always transported back to this specific character, and she's trying to figure out why him. But it's like spooky hours, right? Because she's black and it's the antebellum South, and she keeps getting ported back to this little white boy. And I feel like why this book was so impactful is because, one, I read this book while I was the same age as this main character. And so imagining myself being just pulled back in time to the South, scary, terrifying. I know I couldn't have made it, I'm gonna be real, but like seeing her POV, seeing her work through all of that, and then like seeing the story wrapped together and just like the history and lineage of like a lot of Black people in America was just like nail head. If you've read anything by Octavia E. Butler, you know that she was a writer that was so ahead of her time. Like any book that I have read from her since, it feels like if someone came out with this today, it would still be mind-blowing. And it'd be like, you can see into the future, can't you? Like, it is so relevant to today's society, today's social climate. Like, no matter when I read the book, it feels scary because how did you know? I feel like Octavia E. Butler might have been a time traveler herself or something, because she is such a special author. And I'm slowly making my way through all of her books, but this is the one that just will always stick with me. And this book, no matter how much time passes, I always think, when I think about my favorite books of all time, Kindred is always at the top of the list. Kindred is so, so special. And if you haven't read anything by Octavia E. Butler, definitely pick this up. If you don't take anything else from this video, please take this book. Please, please, please. And with that, we made it to the end. Oh my gosh, those are my favorite books of all time. I can't believe I put that out there in the world, but I feel really good about it. But let me know down below, what's your favorite book of all time? And leave a heart emoji because I love all of these books so much. And if you made it to the end of this video, I love you so much. You are my absolute favorite. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Listen guys, I'm sorry you didn't make it. Don't look at me like that.